I get it, you're looking for a gaming desktop that actually works for the life you lead, not just a laundry list of flashy specs. You want something you can fire up after a long day, stream your favorite shows, jump into a match without waiting forever, and feel solid about the money you spent. The reality is most pre-built rigs either overpromise on paper or hide compromises that only become obvious after a few weeks of use. The link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon, and I've spent the last couple of days digging through forums, watching unboxings, and comparing a handful of similar builds so you don't have to. When you start looking at a pre-built like the ViprTech Stryker 4.0, the first question is, will this machine fit into my everyday routine? The Stryker isn't a bare-bones workstation you only bring out for a once-a-month raid night. It's marketed as an all-rounder with an AMD Ryzen 7 7700X class processor, an RTX 5060 GPU, 16GB of DDR4, and a 1TB SSD. On the surface that looks like more than enough for both gaming at 1080p 144Hz and a bit of content creation. The real test, though, is how those pieces behave when you're juggling a Discord voice chat, a browser full of tabs, and a demanding game like Cyberpunk 2077. One of the most noticeable things about the Stryker is the liquid-cooled CPU. In theory, that should keep temperatures low even when you push the CPU into a turbo boost of 4.4 GHz. In practice, reviewers have reported that the system stays comfortably under 70 degrees under sustained load, which means the fans stay relatively quiet. For a small apartment or a shared room, that quietness translates into a less intrusive gaming rig. No one has to hear a radiator whining while you're trying to focus on a strategy call. The 1TB SSD is another practical win. Most gamers end up with a handful of large titles that can eat up 100 GB each, plus the operating system and a few creative apps. Having a full terabyte means you can keep your operating system, favorite games, and perhaps a video editing suite all on one drive without constantly shuffling files. The claim of up to 30 faster boot times holds up when you compare the cold boot into Windows 11 Pro with a typical HDD. You'll be at the desktop in under 10 seconds, which feels more like a convenience than a marketing buzzword. Now let's talk about the RTX 5060. It's positioned as a mid-range graphics card, and for good reason. It'll nail most modern titles at 1080p with high settings and decent frame rates. In games that are heavily GPU bound, you might see 60 to 70 frames per second in titles like Valorant or Fortnite, which is fine for competitive play. If you push the settings up to ultra in something like Red Dead Redemption 2, you'll probably dip into the 4050 frames per second range, which is still playable but not buttery smooth. The card also supports DLSS, so you can recover some performance if you're okay with a slightly softer image. For streamers, the RTX 5060's built-in bank encoder is a genuine timesaver. You can offload video encoding to the GPU and keep your CPU free for game logic and chat. The 16 GB of DDR4 is adequate for today's games, but it's worth noting that the board uses a standard dual-channel configuration, not the higher-speed kits you might find on a custom build. In real-world use, most gamers won't notice a difference, but if you're into heavy multitasking, say, running Photoshop, a virtual machine, and a game simultaneously, you might feel that ceiling sooner rather than later. Upgrading to 32 GB is possible, but you'll need to buy compatible sticks and open the case, which defeats the plug-and-play appeal of a pre-built for many buyers. One of the hidden trade-offs comes from the chassis design. The Stryker's outer shell is a sleek white case with RGB lighting that runs along the front panel and through the side vent. It looks great next to a standing desk, but the case is relatively compact, and the airflow relies heavily on the front intake fans. In hot summer months, or if you keep the PC in a cramped closet, you'll notice the temps creep up a few degrees after an hour of gaming. The built-in RGB isn't just for show, it's also a heat indicator. When the LEDs pulse brighter, the system is throttling a bit due to heat. If you're looking for a completely silent, low-heat machine, you might prefer a larger tower with more breathing room. The power supply is a 700W unit, which is more than enough for the current components and leaves headroom for a future GPU upgrade. That's a practical plus because you won't be forced to replace the PSU if you decide to swap the RTX 5060 for a higher-end card down the line. The PSU is also modular, so you can keep the cable clutter down, which helps the airflow we just mentioned. The Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2 combo means you won't need a separate dongle for a fast, stable wireless connection, handy if your desk already looks like a cable jungle.